So my sermon preparation was just going nowhere, trying to figure out what to say about rain, and I decided I needed a change of venue to freshen up my brain, so I went to Panera, and I ordered a half a sandwich and a cup of coffee, and I sat down, and as soon as I sat down, Natalie Merchant began to sing on the overhead. And what she sang was, "It's a cold and gray, rainy day. Where on earth is the sun hid away?" Anybody feel like that? I decided then and there that I could count on the fact that it would be cloudy and rainy today so that I could talk about that. And here we are. It has been a wet spring, right? It seems that way to me. It has been a long time since we've seen one sunny day followed by another. Anybody getting discouraged or grumpy? That happens to us when the weather is the same all the time. We get unhappy with it. And pull out your phone and keep checking the weather app on it to see if maybe there's going to be some sun sometime in the future. Don't look, because there isn't. So it is a bad thing, but there is something worse than one rainy day after another, and that is one sunny day after another is much worse. Waking up day after day after day to a bright, clear, sunny sky. Has that ever happened? Has anybody ever lived in a place where every day is sunny and dry, sunny and dry? Where, Carolyn? Yeah, okay. So these things happen. Santa Fe, I'm sure it is a problem because it gets that way. I once spent 6 weeks traveling through the Southwest. And at first I loved it because every day I'd get up and there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and there were no discouraging words spoken until after a while you began to think, oh man, how long can this go on? I haven't even seen a cloud in 6 days, much less any rain. You just start begging for some moisture in the air at the very least. If there could just even be dew on the ground, but nothing. It's tough to live that way. It sounds great to us right now, but it is much better to live in a place where you get a lot of gray days than where you just don't get enough rain coming down. Palestine, today what we call Israel, is one of those places. I was there, you folks helped me go there some years ago, and went to the town of Ephraim, which is a little Palestinian town filled with the people of Palestine live there, and it is out in the middle of the desert, which is the way it is over in Israel. Everything is dry and rocky. And this little town sits in this little valley. It's been there for a long time. How long has it been? You know those signs that say George Washington slept here? The town of Ephraim could put one up that says Jesus slept here. It's mentioned in the Bible that Jesus was there, hiding in the town of Ephraim when the authorities were after him. Ephraim's here in the valley. Up on the hilltop over here is one of the Israeli settlements. It's called a settlement, but don't picture a little village in the middle of the woods. A settlement in Israel is a full-size city. This was a city of 30,000 people up there. One of the things they do is those settlements have water piped into them. The people in that town can go to their kitchen sink anytime they want, turn the tap, and get water. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The people in town of Ephraim, the Palestinian people in Ephraim, get water 2 times a day. 2 times a week for 12 hours each. I get 12 hours on Tuesday, 12 hours on Friday, and that's it. They get no other water than that. How do you like that? Where would you rather live? A place where they get the water. It's so necessary. So this Palestine's the driest place I've ever seen. And that's where we start this story of Elijah, which we read about today. I apparently forgot to put the words together into the PowerPoint, so I hope you listen to it. The story of Elijah begins in the book of 1 Kings, 17th chapter. And Elijah was, probably you would have thought he was a little crazy. We probably would have attempted to lock him up. He lived out in the wilderness. He wore rough clothing, and he spoke out. He went into the middle of the towns, and he'd climb up on a soapbox, except that they didn't have soap, but they did have boxes, and he'd climb on top of one, and he would shout out what he felt the people needed to know, and frequently what he was shouting about was the policies of the king who lived right over there. And kings do not care for such things. They tend to not like it. Actually, nobody likes it, but kings tend to take action against this. Elijah was claiming that the king was leading the people away from God and trying to get them to worship this other god named Baal, who was a storm god. Maybe that seems like a good idea if you live in a place where there isn't enough rain. But Elijah was very unhappy with the idea that King Ahab was trying to turn the people away from their first love of God. And Elijah cried out, shouted out about this. And what did King Ahab finally decide to do? Go ahead, guess. Kill him. That's exactly right. They decided they were going to get rid of this guy that causes so much trouble. So God tells Elijah to head for the hills. And he does. And he goes out of the city, he goes way out into the desert. He finds this place where there is a deep ravine. And he climbs down into the bottom of this ravine. When he gets to the bottom, he finds there a small brook of water. And that's where he sets up camp. He sets up there by that brook, and that's where he hides. I may have been there. I was certainly somewhere, and they said it was the place where Elijah hid. Ann was there too. And it very likely was a place that it could have been, because nobody would find you if you were hiding down in the bottom of that canyon. And we were there to visit that. And they pulled us up in a nice air-conditioned bus. And we got out of that air-conditioned bus, and they handed each of us a bottle of water as we got out. And they encouraged us to walk down to the bottom of the hill. Now, I'm going to tell you an aside right here, and if you want to know the rest of the story, you'll have to come to me in coffee hour. But the funniest thing that anybody said that whole trip happened on the edge of that canyon right there. And it wasn't me that said it. So I'm not going to go there because it'll take too much time. But we walked down to the bottom of this canyon, this twisting road all the way to the bottom. When you got closer to the bottom, you could see a line of green at the bottom. That's where the creek was. The only things that were growing on the edge of that little creek. And I'm talking about a little creek. I'm talking about that kind of a creek. Down at the bottom of this cliff was a monastery that had been there for at least 1,000 years. A monastery that had been carved right out of the cliffside, built up. People went there, men went there, to go to this place where Elijah had been living, to go there and to pray and to meditate and to think about things and to be left alone. And believe me, if you were in this monastery and you didn't want to see anybody, you wouldn't, because nobody comes except a few annoying tourists and the even more annoying people who are trying to sell things to the tourists. Down in the bottom of this valley. But as we walked down the valley, all the way along, you could see these little gullies and trenches, just a few inches wide, dug into the side of the cliff, all the way down. And what those were there for was they were there to catch every single drop of water that fell, every raindrop that fell, every little bit of dew, condensation, any kind of moisture that could be caught was caught in those little gullies that have been carved out of the rock over centuries, and that channels the water down to where the people lived. And this is where Elijah lived for 3 years. They say, and the Bible tells us, that he had the water to drink, and he had food that was brought to him by ravens, which I assume was the same food they were eating, which means roadkill. But I remember when there was a roadkill cafe here in Maine, so it's not out of the question. Whatever it was they brought, that's what Elijah had to eat, and he lived there for 3 years, and not a drop of rain fell on the country for 3 years. What would happen here, where we have lots of water, if we got no rain for 3 years? Can you imagine? The lakes would dry up, the creeks would stop running, the plants wouldn't grow. It would be disastrous. And this in a land that already doesn't get enough rain. When that was over, God tells Elijah, it's time to come out. Climb out, go back and talk to the king. Elijah goes back, talks to the king, tells him that rain is now coming, and that they should all go up to the top of this mountain and wait for it to come. And up there, Elijah prays, and the rain comes. And the people, when the rain comes because Elijah prayed, rise up in revolt and overthrow this king, this Ahab, who proposed a religion that included the sacrifice of children. They overthrow this man, this despot, this dictator. They overthrow him, and a new government comes in, and Elijah is raised up as a hero. Now, there's a lot more to the story of Elijah than that. But the point is that Elijah prayed, God answered Elijah's prayer, and the rain came. And this story is not about controlling the rain. How many of you have ever prayed for rain? I have. I was asked to pray for rain one year at a church I was at, and it rained for the next 6 Sundays in a row. And I have never done that again. I don't know. If it was dry and somebody asked me, would you pray for rain? I would absolutely pray, because prayer is mostly about speaking to God about what our needs are. It's not about what God does in response to it. It's about us opening ourselves up to God. So I would do that. But I don't know if that is the way we get things done in this world. I don't think that's it. I think we pray for all kinds of things, and we hope they come, but that's not what it's about. This story is not about having the power to pray and make the rain come. It's about the belief that God will provide for you. The question is, will God provide for you? And that's what this story is about. Elijah goes off to the desert and down to the bottom of this ravine where he finds food and water. He was drinking what he needed to drink. He was hungry, thin, perhaps, but not starving. He was alone, but he wasn't lonely. There were plenty of birds and lizards to talk to the rocks, listen to the creek, pray and hear God's voice in the breeze as it blows through the canyon. Elijah wasn't alone. He was alone, but he wasn't lonely. And when he climbed out of there, he was in trouble. But he wasn't afraid, because he knew that God loved him and cared for him and would provide for him. And that is the same for you. Now, I don't know how many of you might be hiding out in some kind of canyon right now, hiding out in some kind of place where you are avoiding having to face the difficulties that are with you. And I don't know how many of you feel like you have to be the one who stands up and speaks out against somebody else. I don't know how many of you are finding yourselves in a place so buried, so deep, so far underground that it seems like nobody and nothing and not even God knows where you are. But the message of the story of Elijah is God does know where you are. And God sees where you are. And God calls to you in that place where you are and speaks to you there and lifts you up out of that canyon when the time comes, when the time is right. And maybe you'll be there for a week or a month or 3 days or 30 years. But God lifts you up out of that, because God's desire is always to bring all the people together in God's presence and in the presence of love. It's going to rain today, probably tomorrow too, probably the next day as well. How many of you are itching to get your garden in? Okay, yeah, and it would be nice, but not yet, because there's still more rain to come. How many of you, and I won't ask you to raise your hand, are wondering if this situation that you're in right now will ever come to an end? It will. Our lives are in God's hands. And God loves us. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.